before I go into my own case, I just want to comment a little on what Mungo just said, because there's two different understandings of rationality here. I mean, yes, if we look at it collectively, if we look at it from a kind of universal point of view, of course it would be rational if we would all behave well to each other and help those in need and so on. But the problem is that there is also a sense of rationality in which people say, well, it's rational for me to do whatever I most want to do, or whatever furthers my interests best. And when people follow that rationality, then you get into one of these, like, prisoner's dilemma, as it's called, or coordination problem. Everybody furthers their own interests, and the result is that, in fact, everyone is worse off.
Yeah, it ends in tears.
It ends in tears.
And it's irrational.
Well, but it's not irrational for me if I'm concerned about only my own interests, right? So I think the interesting question is, how do I get to the point where I say, well, I should care about the whole, even though I can only make a really marginal difference to the whole, and it's probably not going to be decisive for how the world turns out what I do. Whereas for me, it would be much more decisive if I, act for my own interests. I can probably do lots of things that I would want to do rather than for the general good. That's the way it's often presented anyway. So I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate here, perhaps, because I do think that really, if we understand our own interests in an enlightened kind of way, we are going to live a better life for ourselves as well, a more rewarding, more fulfilling life, than if we just think, well, how can I earn more money, buy a larger house, maybe over at Wadigos or somewhere, and surf every day and look at the sun glinting across Byron Bay and, jet off to whatever other exotic holidays I wish to, if that's not enough for me. Maybe some of you will disagree here because you're doing just that, but I think that may not be the most fulfilling kind of life that we can have in the end. Thank you. So I want to say just a little bit about how did I get to this. I actually tried to explore this a bit in a book that I wrote called Pushing Time Away. I'm sorry if I seem to be shamelessly promoting my books in this session. I hope my publisher is pleased. But I did that because my maternal grandfather was also someone who wrote books and articles. He was classically trained. He was born he lived in Austria-Hungary. He spent most of his life in Vienna. He was a member of Freud's Wednesday Circle, a little discussion group, though he then broke with Freud and sided with Adler in the dispute between Freud and Adler. But at some stage, I don't know, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, I guess, I decided I wanted to know a bit more about him and see whether I could find some parallels between what he thought and what I thought, and whether I'd had that influence through my mother. It obviously would have been passed on because I had never really read his own works until quite late in life. They're all in German, and although I read German, it's harder work for me, obviously, than reading English. So I started exploring them, and I did find, I think, some sort of parallels in that, he had this sense of compassion for people who were suffering in a variety of ways, and he tried to get people to see through sorts of illusions that made people suffer. He was interested in psychology and exploring psychology, and with Adler exposing the inferiority complex, which actually gets back to what you've both been saying, because it's a matter of having, feeling inferior to others, which of course in a hierarchical society you're more likely to do. So I think there were some traces there. The other thing that obviously is relevant to that is that he died in one of the concentration camps, as did 3 of my 4 grandparents. All of them, in fact, were sent to camps, and only one of them was fortunate enough to survive. So many people have said, well, is your sense of siding for the weak and the powerless and the oppressed the result of having grown up with the knowledge that you only had one grandparent because the Nazis had murdered the others? I find that question really hard to answer. Probably the answer has to be yes. Probably that must have had an effect on me. I was not conscious of it at the time that I started thinking about these things. I was not thinking about, this is what happened to my family, and I must work to try and help those who are the victims of naked, brutal power. But obviously it's possible that there was unconsciously a psychological effect there.
You've all touched on the fact that you think that individuals can make a difference, and that's one of the things that drives your work. When I read each of your work, it occurs to me that you're trying to communicate with me rather than prove to me that you're cleverer than me, and I think that makes your audiences a lot more receptive. And I think it's there's a lot of critics who are eager to dismiss work which is popular or accessible as being inferior or less worthy. And I know David and I have spoken about this. And I wonder, do you find a frustration with that when you're deliberately trying to communicate in a way that people can engage with, it's considered less sophisticated than somebody who's deliberately setting out to position themselves as an expert?
Well, yeah, I hopefully never try and talk down to my audience, given that they're mostly more intelligent than I am. It's hard to in any case, but no, I think that's a great mistake to lecture to people. My writing, my favourite genre of writing is social comedy, which is virtually a study of language, the way people use language to fool themselves, to fool others about their real motives in life. I don't tackle the big grump issues terribly much in my plays. I tackle them in life. I think the old adage. Actually, I'm more interested in stage, in my stage work, in looking at the nature of human nature itself, the way people are prone to self-deceit, prone to deceive others, prone to follow goals that they don't admit. All of that's fascinating to me, but the big grumps we're having today, I think, are best dealt with by top-level journalism that or wonderful writing like Peter's that really tackles those big grumps. So I can't claim to do anything significant in that field, but I feel them personally, and as I say, whenever I read a book of John Pilger's, I think that has done really something significant for the world. When I read one of Peter Singer's books, I say that has done something significant for the world. The work I do, no, I'm just here as a private grumper. My my professional work is much more with the fascination of why people are like they are.